Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. So, as we talked about yesterday, there is a biker rally going on in Ottawa, and some people are concerned it may turn into Freedom Convoy 2.0. Only time will tell. But based on what I've seen and heard with the Freedom Convoy and all the misinformation where people thinking they were true patriots and totally not a bunch of fascists and supporting fascist people. So what we're going to try and do today is head them off at the pass, to use that tired old proverb. The biker convoy has been told by the organizer Neil to not wave, the fuck Trudeau flags and probably a few of the more overt flags. So that's why I am going to try and ruin their day today. Today, we are going to break down the likely flags we are going to see at this biker rally and certain symbols and insignia people should look for to, be aware that the people that are waving those flags or sporting those symbols or those jackets, vests, whatever they may be, are very much fascists. Which then means we can just say, hey, look, see, this was actually very much a fascist rally, by the way, because if you have one fascist and you don't kick him out, welcome to the fascist rally. So first off, a few real quick ones that I'm sure we're all expecting and that we are, already having seen in the past at past freedom convoys and protests. For starters, the American Confederate flag, which itself is not actually the flag of the Confederate States of America. It's the Northern Virginia, battle flag or something like that. And yet a bunch of Canadians will wave these flags around. In fact, there's a bit of a story right now going on in Hamilton where a woman, at least I think it was a woman, has been waving a Confederate flag and people are saying that's a hate symbol. And she's saying, yeah, it's my right. It's a whole story, but basically, yeah, it's a racist symbol. Sorry, it's not about, states' rights and the South. Plenty of other people have debunked this by now. You don't need me to repeat that. But that's one of the ones that we already saw at the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa in the past. And we'll probably see it again. Someone will have a sticker, a patch of it. You will likely see it. There's, of course, the Gadsden flag, the famous Don't Tread on Me flag. And, it's kind of weird that the most versions that I saw were the actual American Gadsden flag, but there are Canadian variants, and I have seen them, sometimes out in the countryside and in a few other places at some rallies. There's the goose version of the Don't Tread on Me flag, and then the lovely beaver version, which says, mind your own damn business. But again, I find it rather weird that you have Canadian patriots waving American flags, like the US flag, the Confederate flag, and also the famous Gadsden flag. It's last I checked, American patriots weren't waving Canadian flags to show their patriotism. It's just really weird. Granted, some people have said that the reason why you may see some of these flags and some other national flags, like the Romanian flag has been used a few times in places, is because it represents fighting back against tyranny, right? So, the American Revolution and America is freer than Canada. We need to emulate America. And Jesus fucking Christ, no, we do not. But that's kind of the hope or the idea, right? And the Romanian flag one, there are different interpretations of what that one might represent. It's about the fall of the Ceausescu regime, or it's about the rise of Romanian nationalism. Whoever you ask, you're going to get a different story, but that's basically why you will see different national flags at these rallies. And we're going to get to a few more of them. Other classic symbols of white supremacy people should be on the lookout for is the Celtic cross, usually a symbol of white pride. Anything like white pride worldwide, so WPWW, 1488, the 14 words, 88 characters. We must secure our existence and a future for white children. That old tired nonsense. There's Aryan Nation, the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, and various other modifiers off of that. The Othal rune or the Othala rune. There's a whole bunch of symbols that people should hopefully be familiar with. And if you see someone wearing RWDS in some way, that stands for Right Wing Death Squad. So, Fun times. If you see that, you definitely know that that person is a fascist. So that's the broad strokes of stuff you can kind of guarantee to expect to see on a few people or a few, flags or trucks waving that. So, that's your kind of short form for already established symbols. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of what makes Canada unique in terms of the white nationalism aspect. So for starters, let's just do some basic groups, like some white supremacist and fascist groups here in Canada. So first we have the Soldiers of Odin. Now, the Soldiers of Odin started as a Finnish anti-immigration group by an avowed neo-Nazi. So, that's already a strike against them, but at their insistence, right, it's just about keeping communities safe from, radical Islam and pesky immigrants who refuse to assimilate. And they're basically just gangs of street thugs thinking they're doing something important when really they're just a bunch of racists hanging out and getting drunk and picking fights with people. And so, yeah, it started in Finland. They have chapters in Canada, Sweden, Norway. They have chapters all over the place, unfortunately. The next group, the Waffen Division. The Waffen Division are just a far-right, neo-fascist terrorist network. The Canadian affiliate version, however, is known as the Northern Order, and, concerning but unfortunately not surprising, they are known to have members of the Canadian Armed Forces and members of police, whether they're like municipal police or provincial police or even the RCMP. And to an extent, they do mean business. There was someone who was, I think it was like either a Muslim man or he was like a Muslim imam. And he was stabbed to death, allegedly, by a member of the Waffen Division or the Northern Order in Toronto back in September of 2020. So, if you see anything resembling that patch, that is very much tied to these people. Next up, we have the Hammerskins. The Hammerskins are one of the oldest and most hardcore of the classic racist skinhead violent gangs in North America. They have mostly been active in the States, but they do have some active chapters here in Canada that are basically running fitness clubs and gyms that serve as recruitment tools. And of course, those fitness clubs are whites only, because, it's totally not about fascism with this crowd. Actually, you know what? That's a little unfair of me. We don't know for certain, and not all people who like to ride are racist. I know plenty of people who are themselves bikers in some capacity or part of a biker club. They're not all racist. Let's not actually be too disingenuous here. Again, the purpose of this is just to inform people and to educate people and to give them something to look out for so that if you see things like this, you know that there are fascists in that group and that they haven't been kicked out or told to stop. That's the key focus here. Which brings us to the Line. The Line started as an anti-lockdown movement, but it has since morphed into being against tyranny and oppression. What exactly that is, that's basically up to individual interpretation. They aren't big fans of saying what they stand for so much as nebulous things that they stand against. And given that a lot of people these days seem to view inconvenience as tyranny, it can be whatever they want, right? So it's like, CRT is tyranny. Teaching me about, the racist past of Canada is oppression. This is unfortunately what some people are legitimately believing and thinking these days. So the Line isn't fascist yet, but it's arguably on the path towards fascism because whatever they don't like is tyranny and oppression. Gay people existing is tyranny and oppression, so I must fight back against it. That kind of crap, right? And then deserving a special place on this list is the QAnon Queen of Canada. Self-professed Queen of Canada, Romana Diagon, is an Indigenous woman, and she claims that, the actual Queen has died, and she left her in charge of the actual Kingdom of Canada. And so she's been issuing a bunch of royal decrees, which are incredibly unhinged. She said that for every vaccine shot that someone like a pharmacist or a doctor gives to a child, they are to receive that number of bullets in their head. So, very sane and rational actor here. And that's the flag and the symbol that she uses. So if you see that around, like either in terms of flags, banners, patches, etc., it's basically a reactionary QAnon conspiracy cult that believes in murdering doctors for vaccinating people and children. Hand to God, wish I was making this shit up. But now we got a few specifically French-Canadian ones, which I'm not expecting a lot of people to know about. So the first one is La Meute. La Meute, which is French for the pack, is basically a Quebecois nationalist or ultra-nationalist group. And their whole thing is, Quebec for Quebecers on steroids. They're opposed to illegal immigration and radical Islam. Not like those have really ever been problems in Canada. But, that's the concern for them. And they tie it all up in Quebecois nationalism. And unfortunately, it was started by two former Canadian Armed Forces members. Just like the Northern Order, the neo-Nazis. However, it is worth mentioning that while many outside groups and observers label La Meute as far-right, La Meute itself vehemently denies these claims. They claim that they're center-left, but it's weird. I personally doubt that, from what I've seen and heard. So that's the broad summary of La Meute. Now we get to the way more niche, but also way more worse Quebecois far-right nationalists. Atalante, which is also from Quebec, but mostly around the Quebec City area, they are absolutely far-right neo-fascists, but because they're mostly confined to Quebec City and its surrounding area, you tend to not see or hear about them as much. But given all the various different rallies and convoys and freedom, be on the lookout for anything relating to Atalante. So these are, in broad terms, the main kind of groups or people that are big names to a certain extent in the Freedom Convoy crowd, the anti-vaxxer, anti-masker crowd and stuff like that. And because of that, that means we also need to talk a little bit more about some of the flags and symbols related to these people, or other flags and symbols that we've seen at these rallies and convoys and counter protests, so that people are a little more familiar with what they're talking about. And so, still staying on the topic of French Canada, we have the Patriot Flag. So the original Patriot Flag was just the simple tricolor of green, white, and red. It was flown during the rebellions of 1837. I've talked about those before a little bit on this channel. Long story short, people wave this flag, especially in Quebec. It's a sign of both Quebecois nationalism and fighting back against a bigger power and fighting for your rights and what you believe in. So, of course, the right wing these days has co-opted it, and so you see it at a bunch of rallies. Like it was in various photos that you can see of the Freedom Convoy occupation in downtown Ottawa. I'm pretty sure there were many flags at the events going on in Montreal and Quebec City. You will see this flag more than likely. And then, somewhat infamously, at the Coutts border blockade, when the RCMP seized a bunch of tactical vests and weapons and ammunition and stuff, they seized a vest and a plate carrier, I think, that had Diagon patches. So let's talk a little bit about Diagon. Diagon are basically just your run-of-the-mill fascists and white nationalists. They say it's a meme country like Kyrgyzstan, but that also hasn't stopped, the Kyrgyzstan flag from being flown at terrible fascist rallies and being, in Facebook headers and in various posts by people who then went on to commit hate crimes and stuff like that. So, maybe it's not entirely a meme if actual people are being hurt or under threat of violence, but it also gets worse. The concept of Diagon is that they would take pretty much red state America and Alaska and also the westernmost Canadian provinces, as well as I think the Canadian territories of Yukon and the Northwest Territories. And, all these various states together would form what looks like a diagonal line on a map of North America. Hence the name, and that's why it's a meme. But really, it's just, the most conservative right-wing red states of America, plus the most conservative provinces in Canada, and the very conservative areas of the BC interior and northern BC. And just, take all that. So that way, the libs finally get their stuff, and we get to live in peace in the glorious white republic of Diagon. No libs or Democrats allowed, basically. This next one is more obscure, but it has made appearances, so for your own information, the Finland Flag. So unfortunately racists just gotta ruin everything. This flag was originally made by like a gothic metal band to celebrate their Scandinavian heritage and their connectedness to the earth. But then the far right seized on it and they're like, yeah, Finland, Vikings and Norsemen and proper good white supremacy. And so they have since adopted it as a flag of their own. It's not big yet, but if you see what looks like a weird green Nordic flag that is also not the Kyrgyzstan flag, that's what this is and unfortunately what it represents. Next up, in terms of we must carve out a segment of the world for white people, as if they haven't already done that on multiple fucking continents. But anyway, this brings us to the Northwest Territorial Imperative. It's pretty much just exclusively an American thing, and the idea is that they would want to take the Pacific Northwest states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and then also Montana and Wyoming for good measure, and turn that into a white paradise where they would peacefully repatriate non-whites from these areas. And this is good because it provides them access to the coast, and it's sparse, spread out land and in the mountains, so it makes it harder for governments to try and govern you. And it's also why we have access to Canada, and we can influence things there, and blah 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 blah. More whiteness and racism. It's basically again of just more people wanting to create more of a white homeland because Europe colonizing and displacing people from North America, the southern cone of South America, as well as Australia and New Zealand, and also a whole bunch of white people in South Africa for good measure, was clearly not enough. Speaking of Australia, that brings us to the Eureka Flag. It's Australian in origin and has historically been adopted by like scrappy, rebellious, idealistic kind of people on both the left and the right historically, but these days it's very much a right-wing thing. People definitely saw this at the Convoy in Ottawa. I think it also made an appearance at the Coutts border blockade. It's made numerous appearances. And again, lately, both in Australia and Canada and America and elsewhere, it's been adopted by the right wing, by conservatives, the far right, the alt-right, however you choose to term these jackasses. It's basically universally a sign of we're against immigration and multiculturalism and, non-whites coming into the country, basically. If you're noticing a trend here, these are all basically different varieties of white supremacy. But by and large, those are the flags, symbols, and groups that you can expect to see at this biker rally and at various other convoys, rallies, and protests around Canada, the States, Australia, etc. But notice the common thread there, right? It's always about white supremacy and about people feeling put upon and threatened by outside forces, which we also touched upon in yesterday's video. But this should concern a lot more people because I know that in the wake of what's gonna happen in Ottawa this weekend, there are people going to say, if something bad happens, God forbid, let's hope everything is actually peaceful and they just kind of roll through and then they leave. Who knows exactly? But if something happens, I'm sure there's going to be people saying, oh no, it was totally peaceful, or it's their fault for causing violence, and people are going to hope that people don't know about these groups and these hate symbols and what they represent, and it's just the worst parts of humanity. So I hope this has been informative. A lot of people tend to not know or pay attention to Canada and its history of white supremacy and the symbols that we have up here that maybe other people don't know about, and so they think they're perfectly fine and harmless. And I wanted to challenge that today because white supremacy is not harmless. Fascism is not harmless, and yet for eagle-eyed viewers, they will probably find more than a few white supremacists and fascists in a convoy or a rally about freedom. If these people were actually fighting for freedom, they would absolutely have common cause with the left on so many issues, but instead it's about racism and fear and selfishness and all the worst elements of society and the far right. And they have to deal with that in Ottawa this upcoming weekend after, again, it's hardly been, a few months since the last convoy rolled through. The fact that this stuff is continuing after most mandates have ended, and that a lot of people also are unfamiliar with these people and these groups and these symbols, all this together, and this likely fascist little convoy rolling through the nation's capital, it is so disappointing, and it is definitely what's bothering me today.